Imagine a war-torn battlefield, the echoes of gunfire fading into an eerie silence. Amidst the chaos of World War I, an extraordinary moment of humanity unfolded, a Christmas truce that brought peace to the trenches, even if only for a day. This is the story of hope, unity, and the resilience of the human spirit during the darkest of times.
In 1914, the world was gripped by a war that would change the course of history. The Great War, later known as World War I, had begun in July, with nations across Europe embroiled in a bloody conflict. By December, the Western Front had become a frozen, desolate wasteland stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. Millions of soldiers were entrenched in muddy, waterlogged ditches, separated by a narrow strip of land ominously called no man's land. The reality of war was harsh. Death, disease, and despair ruled the lives of those fighting. By late November, heavy rains turned the trenches into quagmires, making movement almost impossible. The soldiers battled not just their enemies, but also the elements. Frostbite was common, rats infested the trenches, and food was scarce. The sound of artillery was a constant reminder that death could come at any moment. Morale was low on both sides, with many questioning the purpose of the war. As Christmas approached, the mood was somber. Soldiers longed for home, for the warmth of family and festive traditions. Letters and parcels from loved ones brought some comfort. German troops received small Christmas trees known as Tannenbaums, which they placed on their trenches. British soldiers shared tins of plum pudding sent by King George V, yet the celebrations were muted, overshadowed by the grim realities of war. On December 23rd, reports began to surface of unusual quiet along parts of the front. In some sectors, German troops were seen placing lights and decorations on their trenches. The sight was surreal for British soldiers watching from across no man's land. The harsh landscape of war seemed momentarily transformed, as if the spirit of Christmas had infiltrated even the most hostile environments. By Christmas Eve, an extraordinary event began to unfold. German soldiers were heard singing carols, including Still Nacht, Silent Night. British soldiers, recognizing the tune, responded with their own carols. Across the trenches, voices blended in a remarkable symphony of peace. For a brief moment, the war paused and humanity took center stage. On Christmas Day, December 25, 1914, the unimaginable happened. At dawn, German soldiers emerged unarmed from their trenches, holding white flags or lanterns. British soldiers, initially wary, soon realized it was no trick. Slowly, they climbed out of their trenches, meeting their enemies in the middle of no man's land. Handshakes were exchanged, along with smiles and cautious laughter. The truce spread rapidly along the Western Front. Soldiers who had been killing each other just days before now shared gifts of chocolate, cigarettes, and alcohol. Photographs of families and loved ones were shown, and small tokens like buttons and badges were swapped as souvenirs. The men even played football matches in some places, using helmets or cans as makeshift balls. One account described a German soldier named Joseph chatting with a British soldier named William as if they were old friends. The spirit of Christmas transcended language barriers and nationalities. In one sector, French and German soldiers helped bury the dead, conducting joint funeral services. Prayers were said in multiple languages, with chaplains from opposing sides standing together. It was a moment of shared grief and humanity, a silent acknowledgement of the futility of war. Yet, the truce was not universal. In some sectors, the fighting continued, with officers strictly enforcing discipline. For those who participated in the ceasefire, the day was bittersweet. They knew the war would resume, but for a few precious hours, they experienced a rare glimpse of peace in a time of chaos. The soldiers reluctantly returned to their trenches as night fell on Christmas Day. Orders from high command demanded the fighting resume. Some sectors honored the truce for a few more days, but by New Year's Eve, the war was in full swing again. The guns roared back to life, and the fragile peace was shattered. The Christmas truce of 1914 remains one of the most extraordinary events in modern history. Despite the vast scale of World War I and the immense suffering it caused, this spontaneous act of humanity stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It was an unsanctioned truce, initiated by ordinary soldiers who chose compassion over conflict. High-ranking officials on both sides condemned the truce, fearing it would undermine discipline and morale. In the aftermath, strict orders were issued to prevent any future ceasefires. Officers were instructed to punish fraternization severely, and propaganda efforts intensified to demonize the enemy. Despite this, the stories of the truce persisted, shared in letters sent home by soldiers. One such letter, written by British soldier Private Frederick Heath, described the scene vividly. It was a day unlike any other. The soldiers who had fired at us now shook our hands. We talked, laughed, and for a moment we were brothers. Similar accounts emerged from German soldiers who expressed disbelief at the humanity shown by their supposed enemies. Over the years, the Christmas truce has been romanticized in books, films, and songs. Some critics argue that it was merely an anomaly, a fleeting pause in a brutal war. Others see it as a powerful reminder of what is possible when individuals rise above hatred and division. It showed that even in the darkest times, hope and goodwill can prevail. General Sir Horace Smith Doreen played an indirect yet significant role in the context of the Christmas Truce of 1914 as the commander of the British Second Corps. He was responsible for maintaining discipline along the front lines. Recognizing the potential dangers of fraternization with the enemy, he issued strict orders forbidding any such interactions. Smith Doreen feared that acts of camaraderie could weaken the resolve of his troops and undermine the morale needed for effective combat. Despite his warnings, the Christmas truce still unfolded in certain sectors of the front. This reflected the limitations of his authority in the face of the soldiers' collective desire for peace, even temporarily. Smith Doreen's disapproval of the truce became evident in later reports, where he and other high-ranking officials sought to prevent similar events by tightening disciplinary measures. While he did not directly influence the truce, Smith Doreen's stance highlights the divide between military leadership and the soldiers in the trenches. His orders symbolized the High Command's focus on maintaining the war effort, contrasting sharply with the human instincts of the men under his command, who longed for a reprieve from the horrors of battle. Today, the truce is celebrated as a symbol of humanity's capacity for kindness, even in the most dire circumstances. It serves as a poignant reminder of the shared humanity that unites us all, transcending borders, ideologies, and conflicts. The story of the Christmas truce inspires generations to believe in the possibility of peace, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. The truce did not end the war. The fighting continued for 4 more years, claiming millions of lives. Yet, for those who lived through it, the Christmas truce remained a cherished memory, a moment when peace briefly conquered the chaos of war.
Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a story today that frankly sounds unbelievable. We're going back to World War I, December 1914 to be exact, to explore the Christmas truce.
The Christmas truce, yeah.
It's hard to imagine, right? Millions of soldiers dug into these frozen trenches on the Western Front. Morale's terrible, the conditions are just brutal, and death is a constant threat. It's hard to even picture celebrating Christmas in that environment.
It is. It really is. And that's what's so fascinating about this event. It happened amidst this just unimaginable misery and suffering. We're talking about constant artillery fire, trenches flooded with icy water, and soldiers struggling with, frostbite, disease, even rat infestations.
Wow, rat infestations.
Yeah, it was truly horrific.
I mean, did they even try to boost morale at all?
They did, in small ways.
Yeah.
Think about it. Those small gestures that try to bring a bit of normalcy to this absolutely impossible situation.
Yeah.
So, for instance, the German troops received small Christmas trees to decorate their trenches.
Oh.
And King George V sent plum pudding to the British soldiers.
Oh.
But yeah, you're right. It's hard to imagine, those small comforts, kind of being dwarfed by the sheer brutality of the war.
I can't even imagine finding a glimmer of holiday cheer in those circumstances. But that's what makes this story, the fact that it happened at all, so powerful. So how did this truce begin? Was it a planned event?
It was anything but planned. Imagine you're a British soldier and you're huddled in your trench. You glance across no man's land, that deadly stretch of, land between the trenches, and you see the German troops placing candles and lanterns along their trenches.
They were decorating their trenches in the middle of a war zone.
Yes. It must seem surreal, like a mirage almost. Some reports even mention them hanging Christmas trees on these makeshift poles above their trenches.
It's this bizarre juxtaposition of the festive and the horrific. You'd think the British soldiers would have been suspicious, right? Like waiting for an attack.
Absolutely. And they were initially. But then something even more unexpected happened. The sound of carols started drifting across the battlefield. German soldiers began singing Stille Nacht, Silent Night.
So they're singing Christmas carols to the enemy. I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
It's a powerful image, isn't it? And what's even more remarkable is that the British soldiers, they started singing carols back. Can you picture this? This impromptu echoing choir in the middle of a war zone.
That's incredible. You have to wonder what was going through their minds, singing to the very people just days before they were trying to kill each other.
It really is. And it's important to note that this singing, it wasn't just a handful of soldiers. This was happening up and down the line, This really sets the stage for what happens next, which is truly the heart of this deep dive.
You're talking about Christmas Day, the actual truce.
Right. As dawn broke on Christmas Day, something truly extraordinary happened. German soldiers began emerging from their trenches, unarmed. Some were carrying white flags, others lanterns.
That must have taken incredible courage, to believe that the other side wouldn't open fire.
Absolutely. Accounts from both sides describe this initial hesitation, Like, were the Germans trying to trick them? Was this some kind of a trap? But as more and more German soldiers came out, the British soldiers, they started cautiously climbing out of their trenches too.
So they finally met in the middle of no man's land. What happened then? What did this truce actually look like?
It's hard to even comprehend the weight of this moment, right? I mean, these men have been shooting at each other, lobbing grenades, living in constant fear. But now they're shaking hands, exchanging these cautious smiles, even laughing. There are accounts of them, patting each other on the back in disbelief.
It's just mind-blowing to go from mortal enemies to something else entirely.
It is. It's this powerful illustration of the human desire for connection, even the most extreme circumstances. And what's even more incredible, this truce wasn't just confined to one location. It started spreading like wildfire along the Western Front. We're talking thousands of soldiers participating.
So this wasn't just a small act of defiance. This was something much, much bigger.
Right. It was spontaneous. It was a grassroots movement that challenged the very foundations of the war. And it wasn't just standing around in awkward silence. We have counts of them sharing gifts, showing each other photos of their families, even trading souvenirs.
Souvenirs from a war zone?
Yeah.
I gotta know, what were they swapping?
Well, imagine a British soldier with a German helmet button pinned to his uniform.
Wow.
Or a German soldier with a British cigarette case tucked in his pocket.
Wow.
These small tokens, they represented a connection that transcended the conflict. It wasn't all solemn reflection either. There are stories of them playing impromptu football matches.
Football?
Yeah.
Ow.
Using whatever they could find as a ball, sometimes helmets, sometimes cans.
A football match in no man's land. That image is going to stick with me. It really highlights the absurdity of the situation, right? These young men, forced to be enemies, finding these moments of joy and connection in the middle of all this chaos.
You hit the nail on the head. And it wasn't just this fleeting, superficial interaction. There are stories of deep personal connections forming during the truce.
Yeah.
Take the story of Joseph, a German soldier, and William, a British soldier.
I've read about them. They spent hours talking, like old friends. What did they even talk about?
Well, we can only imagine, can't we? But think about the shared experiences, the anxieties, the longing for home they must have had in common.
Yeah.
They were united by their humanity, despite being on opposing sides of this war.
That's what's so profound about the Christmas truce. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there's always this possibility for human connection.
Exactly. But this connection, this glimmer of hope, it wasn't the only thing that happened during the truce. There are even more powerful stories of shared grief and compassion that emerged. For example, in some areas, French and German soldiers worked together to bury their dead.
They were conducting funerals for both sides.
They were. Imagine soldiers who were trying to kill each other just days before, now standing side by side, united in their grief.
It's hard to imagine the emotional weight of that experience.
It is. And in some cases, there are even accounts of chaplains from both sides leading prayers in multiple languages.
Wow.
These weren't orchestrated events, mind you. They were spontaneous expressions of shared humanity, acknowledging the futility of this conflict that had brought them all to this point.
It's incredible to think about these moments of unity, of shared faith happening in the midst of such devastation. It really challenges that narrative of war as this black and white, us versus them scenario. But it's important to remember that not everyone experienced the truce, right?
Right, you're absolutely correct. A truce wasn't universal. Some sectors of the front line saw continued fighting. Some officers, deeply committed to discipline and duty, strictly enforced the rules of war, prevented any fraternization.
So for some soldiers, Christmas Day 1914 was just another brutal day in a horrific war.
Sadly, yes. And even for those who did participate, there was this underlying awareness that it couldn't last. The truce was this temporary reprieve, a brief flicker of hope in a world consumed by conflict. I can only imagine as darkness fell on Christmas Day, there must have been this sense of dread creeping in for those soldiers, knowing they'd have to return to the trenches, to seeing each other as enemies again.
I bet. Going from sharing carols and cigarettes to aiming rifles at each other again, did it end abruptly or did it kind of fade out?
It really varied along the front. Some units managed to extend it for a few more days, almost like clinging to that fleeting peace. But by New Year's Eve, the guns were roaring back to life across most of the Western Front. Just shattered that fragile peace.
It's tragic to experience that glimmer of hope and then just have it ripped away. It really makes you think about the tragedy of war.
It does. And it wasn't just the soldiers in the trenches who were affected either. News of the truce spread and the reactions from high command on both sides, they weren't exactly positive.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier they weren't pleased. What was their reaction exactly?
Fury, really. They saw the truce as this dangerous threat to discipline and morale. The fraternization, the shared humanity, it challenged the whole foundation of their war effort.
So this incredible act of human connection was seen as a liability.
Exactly. It totally undermined that carefully constructed narrative of the enemy, that they were inhuman, something to be feared and hated. If soldiers were sharing Christmas pudding and singing carols with the enemy, how could they be convinced to keep killing them?
It's like the truce exposed the absurdity of the whole thing, revealing that shared humanity that was there all along, despite the politics.
You got it. And to counter that, high command on both sides took action fast. Strict orders came down, no more ceasefires. Fraternization with the enemy was strictly forbidden, punishable by court-martial.
So they tried to erase this moment of peace, pretend it never even happened.
Kind of, yeah. They doubled down on the propaganda, painting the enemy as brutal and barbaric. reestablish that us versus them mentality that's so crucial for waging war. But there was one thing they couldn't control: the personal stories of the soldiers who were there.
You're talking about the letters they sent home.
Those are the ones. Filled with vivid descriptions of the carols, the gift exchanges, the football matches in no man's land. Powerful counter-narrative to the official line.
They must offer a whole other perspective on the war. Do we have any specific examples of what they wrote?
Yeah, we do. There's this one really powerful letter written by a British private, Frederick Heath. He describes the whole scene with a sense of awe, disbelief. The soldiers they were shooting at just days before were now shaking their hands, laughing with them.
He must have felt like he was in two completely different realities.
Absolutely. And in his letter, he talks about the German soldiers' astonishment at the humanity shown by the British. They couldn't believe that the enemy they were told were savage and heartless would extend such kindness.
It's incredible. A testament to how individuals can transcend the hate, the propaganda that fuels conflict.
Right. And these narratives, passed from soldier to family to friend, helped keep that memory of the Christmas truce alive.
So the truce lived on not just in the memories of those who experienced it, but in the stories they shared.
Exactly. It became this whispered story, almost a folk tale, passed down through generations. And over time, it started to seep into popular culture, inspiring books, films, songs, even plays. It became part of our collective memory of World War I.
It's amazing how one event, this brief truce, has been interpreted and reinterpreted over the years. What are some of the different ways people have viewed it?
Well, some see it as this beautiful anomaly, this fleeting moment of peace and humanity in the midst of a senseless war. Others see it as this powerful indictment of war's futility, a testament to shared humanity that goes beyond those political divides. And still, others see it as this symbol of hope, a glimmer of possibility for peace, even in the darkest of circumstances.
It's like the Christmas truce took on a life of its own. It's a canvas for people to project their own hopes and fears, their beliefs about war and peace.
Right. And that's part of what makes the story so enduring. It resonates with us on so many levels, challenges us to confront our own perceptions about conflict, humanity, and, the possibility of peace. But beyond the symbolic power, the Christmas truce holds some really important lessons for us today, even a century later.
That's what I love about these deep dives. We explore these historical events, but there are always echoes in our present-day lives. What lessons can we learn from the Christmas truce in a world that still struggles with conflict and division? It's a story that really makes you think, what if? What if that spirit of peace had spread? What if it had actually changed the course of the war?
It's a question that stays with you, doesn't it? But even though it was short-lived, its impact shouldn't be underestimated. Here we are over 100 years later, still talking about it, still moved by what happened. It reminds us that even amidst the horrors of war, that desire for peace, for connection, for just basic human decency, it never really goes away.
It's like this beacon of hope reminding us that even in those times when things seem the darkest, humanity can shine through. But what specific lessons can we, take from this and actually apply to our own lives today? How can we translate that Christmas truce spirit into something, tangible in a world that's still grappling with so much conflict and division?
I think one of the most powerful takeaways is that reminder that our shared humanity, it goes beyond all the labels, all the divisions we create. Those soldiers on both sides of the trenches, they were told to see each other as the enemy, as monsters even. But when they met face to face, they recognized that shared humanity.
Yeah.
They saw fathers, sons, brothers, not faceless enemies. That's a powerful lesson we can carry with us today, I think.
It's a reminder to look beyond the labels, beyond the rhetoric that divides us, and see the human beings on the other side of whatever conflict we're facing, But it's not just about recognizing that we're all human. The Christmas truce also highlights the power of individual action, doesn't it?
It really does. This wasn't some top-down peace agreement. This was a grassroots movement started by ordinary soldiers who just chose to lay down their arms to reach out to the so-called enemy.
Yeah.
They didn't wait for permission or orders from their superiors. They acted on their own conscience, their own desire for peace. And that's, I think, a really empowering message, especially now when it's easy to feel powerless.
It's like you said, we don't need to wait for someone else to create peace. We can start building bridges in our own lives, in our own communities.
Exactly.
We can choose kindness, empathy, understanding.
And those choices, they might seem small, but they have a ripple effect, don't they?
Yeah.
They create a more compassionate and humane world, one interaction at a time. And finally, and maybe most importantly, the Christmas truce serves as a powerful reminder that peace is always possible.
It's easy to think it's just a naive dream,
Yeah.
with all the conflict in the world.
It can seem that way, yeah.
Yeah.
But that brief moment of peace in the trenches shows us that hope is never truly lost.
It's a story that really stays with you. It makes you believe in the possibility of a better world.
It does.
It's like a seed of hope planted in our hearts, reminding us that even amidst, the darkness, the seemingly impossible divisions, peace is not just a dream. It's something we can actively work towards every single day.
I couldn't have said it better myself. The Christmas truce, it wasn't just a historical event. It's a testament to the human spirit, a reminder of our capacity for compassion, for connection.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge to all of us to carry that spirit forward, to strive for peace and understanding, in our own lives and in the world around us.
What an incredible journey this deep dive has been. I feel like we've not only explored a historical event, but also delved into the very essence of humanity, both its darkness and its light.
It really has. It's been a privilege to explore this remarkable story with you.
And to you, our listener, we hope you found something in this deep dive that resonates with you, something that inspires you to see the world with a little more hope, a little more compassion, and, well, a renewed belief in the possibility of peace.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you for joining us for this exploration of the Christmas truce of 1914. We hope this story will stay with you, prompting you to think about the power of humanity and the enduring hope for peace. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.